So, so what we're going to be talking about in this class is the punch and the jump animation. So how's it going for you so far? Everybody, for the most part, able to get the idle and the run working? So the one we have in here right now, for me, the idle's looking okay, her run's looking okay. She jumps really high. And I want to fix all of that stuff, but the things that look terrible are the punch, and really the jump isn't that great. Let me go ahead and reset that inherited movement here. We'll change her jump velocity to something a little lower than 3,000. Let's set it more like 600. And now if I hit jump, you get that. So what I'm going to do today is show you how to make a punch and how to, we already kind of have most of our jumping in this doesn't really require a ton of animation. It's almost like you just have to create a few poses. But I'm going to show you how to make those and then how to implement those into the game to work a little bit better. So part of the point of today's talk is that when we're creating these animations, we're creating them for the player, right? So think of animation in terms of film or TV, right? You create a passive animation. You create something for somebody to watch. And so they just experience it. And if something's a little off, maybe they miss it, or maybe they just buy it, right? But they're just watching it. They're just consuming it, right? The difference with that in games is that you are interacting. The player is interacting with your animation. So has anybody ever played a game where you tried to jump or you tried to create some action and it just didn't feel satisfying for some reason, like it didn't feel right? So that's what we're trying to avoid. So in games, our animations are just telling the player that the action that they attempted was successful or was not successful. And so you should be able to predict that action and how it's going to react to your input. So for example, if we had a game where the whole point of the game is whenever you click the button, your character will raise their hand and catch a ball, right? Well, if I click that button and it takes it half a second to raise its hand and catch the ball, it's really hard for me to interact with that, right? I have to predict that ball's location by half a second instead of by like a fraction of a second. So the reaction time of the animation is really important in this. And so we're going to look at two different animations that are both kind of contingent on that. So the first one is the punch animation. And you're kind of seeing a good example of what a bad one looks like. I'm clicking the mouse now, and she doesn't punch until, her punch doesn't make impact till almost half a second, maybe even longer after my click. There's also another little issue with it. You'll notice that as soon as I click it, her arms pop, and then at the end of it, she pops back to it. And that's because we still have that stub animation in there. So let's go look at that animation in Maya. So as it is right now, we had sort of that well, I haven't re-exported this, but I've gone ahead and pasted in my idle pose to the beginning and the end of this. So if I go to my idle, if I just selected all my keys here, right click, copy, and then go to my punch animation, paste, and then I'll paste them at the end too. Then I get kind of that same animation, but it's kind of fast in the middle. Now the reason it's fast in the middle is because I also pasted tangent information when I pasted those keys. And so if I go look at this in the graph editor, my tangents on this are going to look pretty wrong. Animation, select all of this, frame this up. You can see it's very sharp on the tangents, right? So I'm just going to hit auto tangent for that, just to kind of ease it in a little bit. And so now that's my punch animation. Now, right now my punch animation starts on frame 375, but the impact doesn't happen until 394, right? That's almost 20 frames. That's 2/3 of a second for that impact to land after the punch animation is triggered. And so if you've ever played a game that had that kind of lag, it's just very unfulfilling. Like, it doesn't feel like what you are doing is making impact on the character. And it can be a little frustrating as an animator to realize that if you're doing it right, the player isn't even paying attention to your animations, right? They become, the player or the character just becomes an extension of them, right? So what we're trying to do is make this feel as reactive as possible. And so to do that, I want my punch to land relatively fast. Like, I'm going to have my punch land in under 10 frames. So from my start pose to the actual contact of the punch, I'll go ahead and select that. I'll move this back to, let's try 283. Let's see what that looks like. I could probably even go a little faster. Now, let's go ahead and leave it at 283. And so that means my punch is happening now in 8 frames. That's really fast at 30 frames per second, right? And so when I click now, that's going to feel a little bit more reactive. But the problem with that is I just told you to break sort of all of the rules that I've been giving you up to this point in terms of animation, right? You remember in the principles of animation, we talked about anticipation, right? And the way most people think of anticipation is sort of the reverse of the action that you're going to anticipate, right? So if my character were going to punch forward, that means before they punch forward, they have to like rear up or like pull back and then punch forward, right? But that takes up extra time. So if you hit that play, for my character to anticipate back and then punch forward may take up a whole second, right? I want it to feel quick, right? And again, like most people think of an anticipation as an action that goes in the opposite direction. So if my bottle were going to go flying up into the air, it would anticipate down first and then shoot up, right? And this is an example where you can learn that anticipation can actually just be an element of a breakdown, right? So for us to know that my character is going to punch, all I really need to be able to see is the arm pulled back, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to progress my character forward while they're pulling their arm back. So I'm going to anticipate in the middle of this step forward and then follow through on the punch. So let me show you kind of what I'm talking about. First, I'm going to make this punch pose better because this punch pose is terrible. In fact, this punch pose is inaccurate. I just wanted to step her forward a little bit and punch, but if you've ever tried to punch something, you'll realize naturally you step forward with the opposite foot that you're going to punch with. And the reason for that is because you're trying to get as much angular momentum in your torso, right? You're trying to twist your torso and like get that torque motion in your chest in order for that punch to have more impact. So I'm actually going to step with her other foot forward instead. So I'll go ahead and just put this foot back where it belongs, back here, step her forward, and I'm just trying to get the impact pose right now. So this is where that push it till you break it concept comes in. You're going to feel like maybe that's enough. Well, before you just commit to it, go ahead and push it further. Like what happens if I push her even further forward, right? What if I lean her into this? What if I really get her reaching for this punch? Now, that's feeling a little bit better. Of course, her arm's off, but I can fix that. All right, that feels a little bit more like a more intense punch. One of the things to watch out for this is like sometimes if you're not paying attention to your grid, you'll have your character like punching off to the wrong side. Sometimes I'll create a quick polygon cylinder, scale that up really big, hold down J, rotate it, just so I can kind of see the direction of forward and back. And this just kind of gives me an indicator of which direction she should be punching in. So I'm going to make her, I'm going to kind of work off of this pose. But again, like just try pushing it a little further. What happens if I push her even further? Like, can I keep pushing this? Does it get better or does it get worse? Right? And so if I push her really far into this, I'm going to move her foot inward just a little bit and move her weight. Yeah, her weight's over that foot, that's fine. I'll go ahead and twist her hips just a little bit to account for that leg going forward. I'll try to get some of this twist out of her torso. That's good. And a little bit of it out of this arm. And so that's just feeling a little bit better now in terms of a punch. Again, like I'm not going to take anything for granted from that terrible pose I started with. I'm going to also rework her fist and anything else that may need some work just to feel a little bit better. There we go. Remember line of action, contrapposto, silhouette. So I'm going to try to get a little bit cleaner of this line of action going through her shoulders. And what that's also going to do is it's going to feel like a single line that's pushing that. So we get something like that. That's got a little bit more energy to it. Her arm's kind of off there again. Let's move it back over to here. There we go. And then I'm going to have her sort of look up at what she's punching just a little bit more. So just something like that, that's just feeling better to me, right? Maybe curl her forward just a little bit more into that. Now, again, like I'm happy with this pose, but it never hurts just to continue pushing. Like just see if it gets better, if it gets worse. Eventually you're going to get to the point to where like right now I feel like maybe she's punching a little too low, and so I go ahead and go back. But I'll go ahead and stop there. And so just to make sure, I'll set a keyframe on everything, hit S, and so we should be able to see that punch now. So this feels weak, right? Even though we got this really strong punch pose, it doesn't feel like it has a lot of energy behind it. And in all honesty, that's because there is no anticipation yet. So in order to get this, like just if you were to try to punch something like this, you're kind of just like you're just kind of like reaching your arm out, right? And that's not the most efficient way to drive all of that energy forward. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to anticipate, I'm going to lead this motion with her hips, with her lower body, have her sort of stepping forward and like her lower body moving forward first. And then I'm going to twist her torso back and get that line of action leaning back with her arm pulled back. And we're going to get a bigger spacing in the distance that her arm travels in that punch. And I'm going to do all of that in a breakdown that really heavily favors the last pose. All right, so if I just go all the way to like maybe 3 frames before, like that, I'll select everything and hit S. And then just to kind of correct some of this, I'll make sure that foot is actually at the end pose. So I'll copy that from 383, hit S. And so you see now that foot kind of steps forward right there. I maybe will go ahead and roll it back on the heel just a little bit. And then here I'm going to sort of pull her back a little bit, like this. And I'll start doing the same with her spine. Sometimes I get to this point and I'm just like, all of these spine controls, I've wiggled them around so much that like she ends up in this like distorted mesh. So this is where I can go through, select all of these and zero them out and get her back to a little bit of something that seems reasonable. Now again, I'm going to twist her back here. I'll still go ahead and reach a little bit with this hip control. Twist her back. Maybe put this arm forward just a little bit. Continue to pull back. But here's where this is interesting. Like, I'm going to pull her arm back as far as I can. Now I'm still going to point her fist forward, but when you get something like this, you'll notice what's happening in my keyframes now. Her body's moving forward, but she's still anticipating in that process of that happening, right? So she's anticipating as she steps forward, right? And what that gives us is a really big and powerful spacing from frame 380 to frame 383. That's in 3 frames. Her fist goes from here to there, right? And so just with that breakdown key pose here, I get that as my punch. So it's got a lot more energy to it, right? Now there's still a lot of things that are broken in this, including the way she comes back, right? So she's got all this energy and this like step forward, but then her, like everything just kind of blends back to the starting pose. So I'm going to make her kind of step backwards into this pose. And the way I can do that, again, is to kind of maybe find, well, I also think that this transition just takes too long. So I'm going to go ahead and select everything. Maybe move this last keyframe forward to 406. And then I would change that in here to 406. Again, yours can be something completely different. And so now she gets back to here a little bit quicker, right? But I'm pretty much just going to copy what's on frame 406 and put it back here earlier. So maybe frame 392, just to kind of get her back to her pose quicker, right? And instead of having her hit this pose completely, I'm going to have her kind of settle. So maybe her hips will go back past that, but her upper body will still be dragging behind. Maybe her arm still hasn't caught back up yet, right? And so what that does is that gives us some time for her to get back to this pose and settle into it, right? I'll also probably just make sure that my foot is completely back to the start. Yeah, it is. Now the thing that's missing now, there's two or three more things I want to change. From here to here, her foot just slides back with her, right? And this is where I would want to show that she's pushing off of the ground, like that she's pushing herself back. So one of the things I can do is go ahead and create a keyframe on here, right? And for the foot, I'll just copy what I have on 383 to keep it in the same location. So now she pushes herself back, and I could even have her kind of going up on her heel a little bit to do that. Maybe pushing her weight back up again. And that arm is going to start to like maybe overshoot at that point, like something like that. So now we get that, and she just kind of settles back into it. Now again, this is just sort of the blocking plus pass on this. This is not the full polished version. And in all honesty, like, there's a lot of little timing, overlapping action stuff that I could work with. Maybe she gets to this end pose just a touch too early. We give her a little bit more lead time on that. There we go. The other thing is, like, since she's stepping back here, maybe I could have this foot get there a little earlier. Right. Have like a little bit of a step in there. So there's still a lot of little stuff that we could be working on here. One of the ones though that I'm kind of seeing is in this punch from here to here. Like, that's a very big motion and spacing, but look at the arc of her hand when she goes to that. So it kind of does that and then sort of swings out and then punches. And that's because Maya's animating this in FK. It's trying to create an arc. And I don't necessarily want as much of an arc because I want this to feel like a sharp jab, right? So I can increase the impact of this by still continuing to increase the spacing. So even here at this like 1 frame before the impact, I could have her still having her arm way back here. And that means that that jab is going to happen in almost 1 frame. Well, it is going to happen in 1 frame, right? From there to there in 1 frame. So now it has a lot more impact to that punch. Now again, there's still a lot of overlapping action stuff I need to add into this, but this is feeling a lot better to me. So I'm going to go ahead and go File, Save Scene As, do B04, and I'm going to go ahead and export out this animation and put it into the game engine. So Game Exporter, I just have punch selected. I'll go ahead and put this in exports to, choose, and hit export. Yeah, I want to replace it. Okey-doke. And this is the one. That means I need to just go ahead and close this other one. And so now I can just right click on this punch animation and hit re-import. And when I play it, the punch animation just feels a little bit more believable. Now, one of the things to remember, oh, that's funny. I did 2 different idols. I had this coming from the wrong idol. Like, this is the wrong character rig that I used. All right, that's okay. I can kind of show you how to fix that. But no, I basically how we would do that is I would just copy that pose out of another Maya file and import it in to get my correct pose. Let's go ahead and, I guess I can do that. Let's see.
Let's go ahead and pull it out of 02. Select all of that, choose those keys, Control C, go back into my other Maya, select all of that. I think this will work. Control V, nope. All right. Here. I'm not going to fight with this right now. We'll just kind of ignore that little hitch that happens there. Here. I'm just going to open up the other class's Maya file where it works. And so you'll notice when we watch it in here, we're getting a very similar punch. And the same idea to it. Now, the last little thing I want to look at, and I'll open up the other class's jump as well so you can see this, is the jump animation. And to talk a little bit about the things you'll want to implement into yours, but mainly what I want to talk about is how you can take this into Unreal to make it a little bit more responsive. So for the jump animations, we have this game exporter. I've already edited these so you can see them. We have our jump up animation, which is going to be really my character starting from a squatted down version of the idle pose, and then very quickly pushing up into the air. So this entire animation is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 frames long to go from on the ground to up in the air. The other thing notice is that I'm having her push off. That like there's a strong contact pose where she's pushing off the ground. So the jump loop is just an idle animation of her hovering in the air. Okay? And the reason for this is because if she's just falling through the air, you want to kind of have that like look like parts of her body are swaying or moving as she's falling through the air. Mine's not looping the best in the world, but I just didn't want to spend too much time in class making it loop. And I did this the exact same way I did the idle. I just went in there, drew on those curves with the add key tool. Now the jump down animation starts at the end of my jump loop, so those should be the same exact poses. And in the process of about 2 frames, I go to this stretched out pose for her to impact, and then squash down and kind of have a little bit of overshoot, and then I end back in the idle pose. And so this is a really, like this is just 15 frames, right? So it's a pretty quick animation. So if I re-exported all of those and brought those back in, you would see, and I did, you would see that my jump up animation looks like this. Really fast, right? And the reason for that is because I want this to trigger in the space of time I tap the space bar, right? So like 8 frames is actually possibly even a little long. And the hard part about that is you have to still make it read. So like maybe one of the ways you do that is you like push this this push off pose or push this anticipation pose that we start with. The jump loop animation is again just going to be her sort of looping in the air. And so if she's just falling forever, that's what we get. And then the jump down animation has this impact to it. Now we've already seen how we implement that into the blueprint, right? How we mapped all of these through there. But the element that we can still change that's pretty handy is we can change how these transitions work. So there's a couple of things. From jump start to jump loop, if I double click on that, you'll see that there's this character remaining ratio, right? And more than likely yours is set to 0.1. So what this is going to do is it's going to kind of grind off a little bit of the end of your jump up animation and a little bit of the beginning of your jump loop animation, and it's going to like blend them together, right? So if you have some important information happening at the end of your jump up animation, you may lose some of that, right? We have this same option over here from jump end to idle. If I double click on that, you'll see that this is the amount of time it's going to blend. And I've already changed mine, but yours by default is probably 0.1, right? So it's going to take about 1/10 of a second before that animation ends, it's going to start blending, right? So again, if you have something important happening in that 1/10 of a second, you're going to lose some of it. So we can change that if we want those blends to happen a little faster or a little slower. I can put a 0 in there, 0.01, right? And that blend will happen a little faster. So I'll hit compile and save. For the most part, we're not going to notice a huge difference in this. Right? So the other element you can change is to not double click on this transition, but just click on the transition. And when I highlight it, you'll see that we have the duration of the transition. How quickly does it translate or transition from your idle or your run to your jump start, right? And if you are animating something that has like that really quick anticipate down before it pops up, you may not want any transition there at all. You may want it to just immediately pop to it. Or you may want it to be a really small transition. So for me, I transition from my idle run to my jump start. I just set that to 0. Let me show you what happens. If I set this to, say, 0.5, it's going to take it 1/2 of a second to translate up to that jump start, right? And so if I hit play on this, when I hit space to jump, see what happens? Like, it's just sort of trying to blend up into that jump, and I'm only getting part of my jump up animation. Whereas if I go back to this and set this to like 0.01, compile and save, it's going to blend it over 1/100th of a second, like probably like 1 frame. And now I get a little bit more of that push off from the ground. You can see it a little bit more clearly on the landing as we go from the jump loop to the jump end. And the reason for that is because if you'll remember, my jump down animation has that stretch right at the beginning of it, right? Like it has this pose right here, or right there, right? And if I'm blending too much on that, then it's going to sort of, it's going to get rid of some of the information from this pose, right? So I will go back to my blueprint, and you'll see that in this transition here, I have it set to 0.01, but again, if it was set to like 0.5, this landing is going to feel very weak. So I'm losing all of that information from my animation in that transition. So I'm going to set mine to really small amount. I could do 0. Let's see what that looks like. And 0 means it's not going to blend it at all. It's just going to immediately start playing it. Yeah. So that's looking a little bit better now. The last transition is transitioning from my jump end to my idle run, and it's set at 0.2, which means some of that overlapping action I build into the pose of her standing back up is missing. So I'm going to try setting mine to 0.01, or I mean, I guess I could just set it to 0. Let's see what that does. Compile and save. So now when I hit that, it feels a little bit more satisfying, right? That feels like everything I wanted it to do worked. And when I click my mouse, that punch feels correct because it's happening very shortly after I click my mouse. Now that's why we have this working in Unreal as early as we can, is because you can animate for a long time and have an animation that looks great in Maya, but once you get this into Unreal, if it's not feeling correct, then you pretty much have to throw that away and do it again. Right? So like early as possible, get that in there and see how it feels, see if it feels right, because this is the way you're going to present it. So that brings up another question that some people had was, how do I turn this in? How am I going to present this? So most of you are familiar with OBS. If you're not, just type in OBS into like a web browser. It's a free screen capture software. And so this is what I use to record our class. You can set up a video device or a display capture. And you can also set up one in here that's called window capture, I think it is. Yeah, window capture. And that's only going to capture a specific window, whichever window you have highlighted. So what you're going to do is install that, and then instead of hitting play here and capturing all of this interface, go to launch and click launch. And so what this is going to do is it's going to build a standalone version of this that you can just run in a window. There's another way you can render this all out to be a standalone program you can give people, and I can show you how to do that as well. But now I have a bigger screen that I can capture, and it's going to play a little bit more completely, and I can just capture this with OBS. Now, what I would say to do is capture it from multiple angles, right? So maybe I record for a little while of my character running around, have her jump and land, stop it, have her punch, right? And let her idle for a little bit. But this maybe isn't the best angle you want to show it off in your demo reel. So like if you want to be able to see your run a little bit better, maybe I can use, A and S at the same time to have her run diagonally toward me, or A and D, or S and D. And I can capture it from this angle, right? So you're just going to capture it from angles that it looks good. And like hard drive space is cheap, right? You can record for 30 minutes if you wanted to. And then eventually take this into Premiere and chop that up, and that will be what goes into your demo reel. Really the capture should be what shows off your animations the best, right? How is it that you would want an employer to see that animation? Probably not with her standing out on empty space like that. Right? But like this maybe is the best angle to show the idle. So what I would do is capture a video that has you playing through all of your animations. So obviously the way you do not want to show your punch animation is to try to play it while she's running, because then you get this like foot sliding thing happening, right? You want to stop and then stop and then punch, right? Maybe you want to show your jump by having her jump off of something, right? And so that's one of the reasons I'm trying to get this effects thing to work. I swear it, like again, it works in this one. I don't know why it wasn't working in y'all's class. Is because just having her punch the air, like that's a pretty decent looking animation, but it just seems to read a little bit better when she punches something. Well, and you get like a reaction out of it. I need more objects in here for her to punch. So whenever you're done, you can just hit the Windows key and then close that, and it's done. Launch complete. Okay, any questions, comments on any of this? I bet you're wondering why I haven't passed around the attendance sheet yet, aren't you? I'll go ahead and do that. Parker left some messages for some of y'all in the back. I don't think they heard me. Okay, so any questions, comments? No? All right. I'm going to go ahead and upload this video. The rest of the class today is more time for me to kind of walk around, help you out, give you any feedback that that you need, and give you a little bit more work time. So, all right, cool.